Norman Mearle Grim Jr., the Clawhammer Killer. Florida death row inmate set for execution in merciless murder. The countdown to death. Welcome back to the Justice and Injustice channel, where we uncover the most disturbing secrets of true crime cases. Look at this date, October 28th, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. That is the moment Norman Mearle Grim Jr. is scheduled to die. He is 65 years old. He has spent nearly 3 decades on Florida's death row for a crime the state's own attorney general called brutal and merciless. This isn't just an execution. It's the final justice for one of the most savage acts of neighborhood violence the state of Florida has ever seen. His victim was Cynthia Campbell, an attorney, his neighbor, a woman who, in a moment of misplaced trust, accepted an invitation for coffee from the wrong man. What followed was a frenzy of violence. Grim sexually assaulted her, then bludgeoned her with a claw hammer and stabbed her over and over with a steak knife, before crudely wrapping her body and dumping it into Pensacola Bay. This story is a deep dive into the mind of a career violent criminal, a man with a chilling history of abduction, an assault that tragically culminated in the savage murder of Cynthia Campbell. We'll track the eerie timeline of that morning, from the broken window that brought police to the murder scene, to Grim's failed attempts to fool investigators. And we'll examine the overwhelming physical evidence, the blood, the bedding, the murder weapons that left the jury with zero doubt. Norman Grim has exhausted his appeals. Governor Ron DeSantis signed the warrant. The countdown is real. This is the case of the Clawhammer Killer, and the terrifying truth about the neighbor you should never trust. Please like and subscribe if you're new to the channel. The dark history of Norman Grim. Who was Norman Mearle Grim Jr. before he became the notorious East Milton Killer? The state argued for the death penalty by noting Grim had a largely normal childhood, was able to work, and was of normal intelligence. But beneath that veneer of normalcy was a history of violence that kept bubbling to the surface. He was born in 1960. He joined the Navy after high school, but was kicked out for undisclosed trouble, a taste of discipline that clearly didn't stick. By 1983, the darkness had fully emerged. Grim was sentenced in Escambia County for a string of violent felonies: unarmed robbery, armed burglary, kidnapping, and aggravated battery. He was a textbook example of escalating violence. Released from prison in 1990, he moved to Texas, where he was immediately incarcerated again for robbing a store. He was eventually paroled, transferred back to Florida, and settled down in Milton. For 4 years, he held a job in a fabrication department, even earning a good, productive worker reputation. But you can't erase a history of violence. He married in 1997, but stability was a mirage. She divorced shortly after, and it was in this new residence that she met the victim who would change her life and end hers, her neighbor, Cynthia Campbell. Consider this: a man with a history of kidnapping, aggravated assault, and armed robbery, released, a repeat offender, and now living right next door to a lawyer. Crucially, when he murdered her, Grim was still on parole from his Texas conviction. He was a ticking time bomb the system failed to disarm. The pattern, laid out in court documents, is terrifying. We need to underscore the nature of his prior crimes because they show a clear predisposition for the ultimate act: the choking attempt. In 1982, he grabbed a woman walking to work, choked her, and pulled her into his car, threatening murder. She only escaped when she distracted him by mentioning her purse as evidence. The armed intruder, a different woman next door, was awakened by him flickering her lights. He was standing there with a knife. She fought him off, getting caught in the chin. The teenager abduction. He accosted a 14-year-old girl walking to class, dragging her into the woods, tearing her earrings out of her ears. Grim's life was a violent cycle. And on July 27, 1998, that cycle reached its brutal final destination. The eerie invitation, and the failed cover-up. The day began with a small act of violence that concealed a much larger one. Around 5 a.m., a lug nut was thrown through Cynthia Campbell's window. She called the police. Deputy Sheriff Timothy Lynch responded to a call from Cynthia Campbell, who complained of a disturbance behind her house. Upon Lynch's arrival, Campbell was standing on her front porch with her next-door neighbor Norman Grim Jr., who was wearing a pair of cut-off jean shorts. All three walked around the porch to the back of Campbell's house, where Lynch noticed a broken window and a chrome lug nut in the surrounding bushes. Grim claimed he'd noticed the broken window, the picture of the concerned neighbor. Grim invited Campbell over for coffee. She initially said no. A momentary distraction. A large tree branch snaps off, hits her car, sounding like a gunshot. The officer goes outside. Grim, who had stepped away, returns, sees the branch, and renews his invitation for coffee. This time, she accepts. Think about that calculated move. He knew the police were leaving. The all-clear sign for his hidden intentions. Officers left at 5:51. Aim Campbell walked into his house for a cup of coffee. She never walked out. Grim's actions in that house were pure evil. Bludgeoning her with the claw hammer, stabbing her repeatedly 7 times through the heart, and sexually assaulting her. This was not a crime of passion. This was a crime of merciless brutality. His first task, clean up the sickening carnage. The disappearance was quickly noticed. At 7:20 a.m., Connie Kelly, the bookkeeper, arrived at the house and called Campbell, but got no answer. Kelly became concerned and called the police. Cynthia McGee, Campbell's paralegal, went to Campbell's house later in the morning, saw her car parked in front of the house, and went inside to check. Deputy Sheriffs Calvin Rutherford and Stephen McCauley arrived 10 to 15 minutes after McGee. Front door open, car there, lights on. No Campbell. After initially balking, he let them walk through. He was confident in his cleaning. Rutherford obtained permission from Grim to look inside his home and noted that Grim had no shirt on and that there was a light pink color on one of his shoulders. Neither deputy saw any signs that there had been a struggle in the house. Corporal Blevin Davis arrived at 11 a.m. and talked briefly with Grim. Davis observed that Grim was wearing a pair of cut-off blue jean shorts with several small reddish-brown stains on them. There was another reddish-brown stain on his shoulder. Grim explained that the stains were primer paint from where he had been working on his car. Grim asked for and obtained permission to get his dogs that were now loose in the neighborhood. He denied them access to the trunk of his car, claiming he didn't have the key. All calculated moves to buy time. Around 11:50 a.m., Grim made his final frantic move. Claiming his dogs were loose, he asked permission to leave. With an officer following, he drove away. But instead of returning home after a brief stop, he led the officer on a high-speed, winding chase around Pensacola, eventually managing to lose the tail. Grim was running, not from an arrest, but from a body. Thomas Rogers, the manager of the north end of the Pensacola Bay fishing bridge, ran a bait and tackle shop and convenience store at the foot of the fishing bridge, and he testified that sometime early in the afternoon of July 27, 1998, Grim came into his store. On the same day, Cynthia Wells, a former co-worker of Grim, left work around 1 p.m. and was traveling on the Pensacola Bay Bridge, where she saw Grim walking beside his parked car with both doors and the trunk open. She testified that he was wearing a light-colored shirt and cut-off blue jean shorts. This was rage. This was personal. This was merciless. In the afternoon of July 27th, James Andrews and his son were fishing from the Pensacola Bay Bridge. Around 3:30 p.m., Andrews snagged a horrific load, a human body wrapped like a piece of refuse. Law enforcement was called to retrieve the body, which the parties stipulated was Cynthia Campbell. After receiving word that Campbell's body had been found, Detective Donnie Wiggin went to the convenience store where he talked to Rogers and retrieved a surveillance videotape showing that Grim had entered the store just after 2 p.m. Law enforcement officers secured Grim's house. Davis drove to the Pensacola Bay fishing bridge and was present when Campbell's body was brought to shore. Davis testified that her body was wrapped in striped sheets, which the police determined belonged to Grim, and black garbage bags. When the bags and sheets were removed at the autopsy, Davis observed that a piece of green carpet was wrapped up with everything else. Davis recalled having seen a similar piece of green carpet hanging over the rail of Grim's back porch. Thereafter, the police obtained a search warrant for Grim's home and an arrest warrant. Crime scene analyst Janice Johnson from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement attended Campbell's autopsy conducted by Dr. Michael Birkeland, a forensic pathologist. Johnson testified that under the black garbage bags, the body was wrapped in carpet and sheets. They had to remove layers of material, including the garbage bags, a floral sheet, a blue striped flat sheet and fitted sheet, a piece of green carpet, masking tape, and rope. Dr. Birkeland testified that Campbell's face was covered with deep abrasions and contusions around both eyes, her forehead, both sides of her chin, and her lips, all of which Dr. Birkeland described as blunt force trauma. There was additional blunt force trauma to both shoulders and to the head. There was additional blunt force trauma to both shoulders and to the head. These injuries were all consistent with having been inflicted by a hammer. Dr. Birkeland testified that Campbell suffered 11 stab wounds to the chest, 7 of which penetrated her heart, and were consistent with having been caused by a single-edged weapon like a knife. Dr. Birkeland opined that the blows to the head preceded the stabbings to the chest, and that Campbell's death was caused by blunt force trauma to the head and multiple stab wounds to the chest. After attending the autopsy, Janice Johnson went to the victim's home where she found no signs of any struggle. She then went to Grim's home where she found 2 damp mops in the kitchen that had suspected blood stains. Although the area appeared to have been cleaned, Johnson discovered small areas of blood on the floor of the kitchen and on the cabinets near the floor. Johnson collected a coffee mug from the kitchen counter and 2 bloody fingerprints on a trash bag box. Inside the kitchen trash can was a striped pillowcase that appeared to have blood on it, and that had the same pattern as one of the sheets found wrapped around Campbell's body. In the dining room, Johnson collected additional samples of suspected blood from the window frame and from the floor. In the living room, Johnson seized a pair of athletic shoes and a rope which appeared to be consistent with the rope found on the victim's body. Johnson also collected a pair of blue jean shorts with bloodstains on them. On the back porch, Johnson found a piece of green carpet draped over the rail, which was consistent with the green carpet wrapped around the victim's body. Johnson also found a cooler in which she found a steak knife, a piece of terry cloth with reddish-brown stains on it, a pair of Hanes underwear, a tampon with reddish-brown stains on it, a pair of prescription eyeglasses, a wristwatch with a broken band, masking tape, a blue and white striped pillowcase, a hammer with suspected blood, some cloth tissue, and a Bud Light beer carton. 4 days after Cynthia Campbell's body was found, Grim was arrested in Oklahoma on July 31, 1998. Detective Davis flew to Oklahoma to pick him up, to retrieve the clothes he had been wearing, and to arrange for the return of Grim's car. DNA analysis of stains on the cut-off jean shorts Grim was wearing when arrested revealed 12 genetic markers consistent with the DNA of Cynthia Campbell, and the steak knife found in Grim's cooler yielded 6 genetic markers consistent with the victim. The hammer found in the same cooler also yielded genetic markers consistent with the victim, as did swabbings from the box of trash bags. Likewise, stains on a pair of blue jean shorts and a pair of shoes found in Grim's living room bore genetic markers consistent with those of the victim. The final nail in the coffin was the science. DNA tests on the blood drops found in Grim's home and in the trunk of his car were an irrefutable match for Cynthia Campbell. They even found her fingerprints on a coffee cup in his kitchen, the very cup from the chilling, fatal invitation. Grim's meticulous cleaning was a failure. The truth was written in blood and DNA. The trial began in October 2000. After the presentation of evidence during the guilt phase, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on the charges of first-degree murder and sexual battery upon a person 12 years of age or older with the use of a deadly weapon. The jury saw the evidence, the violent history, the calculated timing, the DNA, the hammer. On November 1, 2000, he was found guilty of first-degree murder and sexual battery. The next day, the jury unanimously recommended the death penalty, a 12-0 vote. At the penalty phase, the state introduced certified copies and testimony relative to Grim's prior Florida convictions. 1. Unarmed robbery. 2. Kidnapping and robbery. 3. Armed burglary and aggravated battery. And 4. Armed burglary and armed theft. The state's last witness was the victim's mother, Dorothea Campbell, who read a short victim impact statement. Grim did not present any mitigating evidence, and the jury recommended the death penalty by a vote of 12-0. Grim's violence had finally earned him the ultimate penalty. Justice is served. Grim was sentenced to death on December 21, 2000, with an additional 32 consecutive years for the sexual battery. His crime met every brutal criteria for the death penalty: prior violent felonies and murder committed during the commission of sexual battery. Cynthia Campbell was a busy lawyer with enemies, but she was murdered not by a vengeful client, but by the monster living next door. Norman Mearle Grim Jr. is scheduled for execution on October 28th, a life of violence ending in the hands of the state.